The Bentley was the first thing Officer Darren Kowalski noticed. Not the couple inside it. Not their age. Not the Sunday church clothes. Not the way the old man's hands were folded carefully over the steering wheel, at 10 and 2, like he'd been taught in another era. Just the car. A black Genesis GV80, this year's model. Plates clean. No cracks in the front bumper. No peeling tint on the windows. A car like that sitting at the red light on Mercer Avenue in Caldwell, Georgia, with 2 elderly black people in the front seats. That was, apparently, enough. Kowalski hit the lights. Colonel Harlan Osei-Beaumont had driven through tougher situations than a traffic stop. 31 years with the United States Army, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. He'd sat across tables from generals and senators, commanded units of 200 men, in conditions that would break most people before breakfast. He knew how to stay calm. He put both hands on the wheel before the officer even reached the window, the way his father had taught him in 1979, the way he'd taught his own children 40 years later. Some lessons in this country don't change regardless of how many medals you've earned. His wife, Lucille Osei-Beaumont, was 66 years old and had spent the past 43 years as a registered nurse, the last 18 as Director of Patient Services at Caldwell Memorial Hospital. She was wearing her church hat, a wide-brimmed ivory thing with a silk ribbon that her youngest daughter had sent from Atlanta, and she was holding a casserole dish on her lap because they were on their way to drop it off at a sick neighbor's house before Sunday service. She looked at her husband when the lights came on. He looked straight ahead. "Lice and registration," Kowalski said. Colonel Osei-Beaumont handed them over without a word. There was a pause, a long one, the kind that isn't about paperwork. "This your vehicle, sir?" "It is. You have documentation proving that?" "The registration you're holding proves that." Kowalski's jaw tightened. He walked back to his cruiser. 5 minutes passed, then 8. Lucille kept her hands still around the casserole dish. She'd learned that too. Don't fidget, don't look agitated, don't give them anything to interpret. Harlan stared at the dashboard. He had done nothing wrong. He had driven 15 miles per hour under the speed limit the entire way because the streets were damp from last night's rain. He had signaled every turn. He had his registration, his insurance, his license, 31 years of service to this country, and 2 hands on the wheel. None of that seemed to be the point. When Kowalski came back, he had another officer with him, a younger one, Officer Brett Salas, who looked like he'd graduated the academy sometime around last Tuesday. Salas hung back at the rear of the car, one hand resting on his belt. Professional courtesy, they called it, or backup, depending on what they'd decided already. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." "May I ask why?" "Step out of the vehicle, please." Colonel Osei-Beaumont stepped out. He was 68 years old, 6'1", silver-haired, dressed in his best charcoal suit, because he always wore his best on Sundays. He stood straight without thinking about it. Decades of military bearing didn't negotiate. "Ma'am, you too." Lucille set the casserole dish carefully on the floor of the passenger seat and climbed out. She did not rush. She did not argue. She stood next to her husband on the sidewalk in her ivory church hat and her good shoes, and she looked at Officer Kowalski with the particular patience of a woman who has survived 66 years in America. "We've received a report," Kowalski said, "of a vehicle matching this description, make, model, color, reported stolen out of Macon this morning." Colonel Osei-Beaumont didn't blink. "My vehicle has never been in Macon. I purchased it 14 months ago at Hendrick Automotive in Atlanta. All documentation is in the glove compartment." "I understand that, sir. But until we can verify, the registration is in your hand. My name is on it. The VIN matches the plate. You can verify that in under 2 minutes from your cruiser." Kowalski looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man who didn't like being told what he could do in under 2 minutes. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." There it was. The thing Harlan Osei-Beaumont had prayed every single Sunday for 40 years, he would never have to explain to his children. He turned around. He put his hands behind his back. He felt the cuffs go on, and he stood straight, the way he'd stood at attention in places this officer had never heard of, and he did not say another word. Lucille made a sound. Not a cry. She was too controlled for that. Something smaller, a sharp intake of breath. "Ma'am, we're not detaining you." "Then why is my husband in handcuffs? Standard procedure while we..." "I have worked at Caldwell Memorial Hospital for 30 years. I know what standard procedure looks like. This is not it." Salah stepped closer. "A warning. Not a word. just proximity. Lucille fell quiet, not because she had nothing left to say, because she understood, with the clarity of someone who has been a black woman in a southern city for 6.5 decades, exactly what the calculus was here and what it would cost her if she got it wrong. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk across the street. Sunday morning pedestrians, a couple of teenagers with a basketball, an older woman walking a small dog who had stopped walking entirely. Nobody intervened. Nobody pulled out a phone. They just watched, the way people watch when they're not sure which side of the line they're standing on. The radio in Kowalski's cruiser crackled. He walked back to it. Salas stayed, 4 feet from Lucille, watching her. Harlan Osei-Beaumont stood handcuffed on a public sidewalk in Caldwell, Georgia, on a Sunday morning in his best suit, and he thought about the last time he'd worn that suit. His grandson's baptism, 6 months ago. His daughter Renelle had cried during the ceremony. Good tears, the kind that mean something real. His son-in-law Darius had shaken his hand afterward and said, "Thank you for everything, Colonel." The grandchildren had climbed on him like a piece of playground equipment. It had been a good day. He thought about that instead of the handcuffs. Kowalski came back with a face that had shifted into something complicated, not apologetic. That wasn't going to happen, but recalibrated, the way people recalibrate when reality doesn't cooperate with their assumptions. "Sir, we're still waiting on confirmation from Officer." Harlan's voice was low and level. "I want you to call your supervisor." "That's not necessary at this. Call your supervisor." 31 years of it. Kowalski stopped mid-sentence. Lucille heard a car slow behind her. She didn't turn around yet. She heard the door. She heard footsteps, quick and purposeful. Then she heard her daughter's voice. "Mom." Renelle Osei-Beaumont Gaines was 38 years old and had spent the past 11 years as a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. She was still in her Saturday clothes. She'd driven 40 minutes from Augusta when her father's pin drop came through on her phone. The one he sent without explanation because he'd promised her years ago that if that pin ever moved from Mercer Avenue, she should come. But there was nothing casual about the way she moved. She walked past her mother, placed one hand briefly on her father's arm, and then turned to face Officer Kowalski. "Lieutenant Colonel Renelle Gaines," she said. "JAG Corps, United States Army. I'd like to see the documentation for this detention." Kowalski looked at her. "I'd also like your badge number and the incident report number for whatever complaint prompted this stop." Salas had gone very still. "Ma'am, this is a standard. My father is a retired colonel with 31 years of service. He is wearing dress attire, driving a vehicle registered in his name, in a neighborhood where he has lived for 22 years. I need you to tell me, specifically, what probable cause you had for this stop, what the nature of the report was that you claim to have received, and under what authority you placed him in restraints." The words came out clean and organized, the way legal arguments come out when the person making them has spent 11 years in courtrooms and knows exactly how much weight each one carries. Kowalski opened his mouth. "In writing," Renelle added. "I'll need all of that in writing." The Sunday morning crowd on the opposite sidewalk had grown. Someone had a phone out now. Several someones. Kowalski could see it. He understood, probably for the first time since he'd hit the lights 15 minutes ago, what kind of situation he was actually in. He removed the handcuffs. Harlan Osei-Beaumont straightened his jacket. He didn't say anything. He looked at his daughter with an expression that contained more than anyone on that sidewalk could fully read, something that was gratitude and grief in equal measure, because a man who spent 31 years serving a country should not need his daughter to drive 40 miles on a Saturday to make a police officer return his dignity. That is not how it should work. And yet, Lucille took her husband's hand. Renelle was already on her phone. What followed was not quick, but it was thorough. Lieutenant Colonel Gaines filed a formal complaint with the Caldwell Police Department's Office of Professional Standards. The following Monday morning, she filed a secondary complaint with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. She contacted the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, not because she needed the help, but because cases like this one don't end with one family's resolution, and she understood that better than most. The internal review that followed discovered 3 things. First, that no report of a stolen black Genesis GV80 had been received by the Caldwell PD from Macon or anywhere else that morning. Second, that Officer Harlan Kowalski had been the subject of 2 prior complaints in the past 4 years for conduct during traffic stops involving black motorists, both of which had been marked resolved without formal action. And third, that his body camera, the one he was required by department policy to activate at the beginning of any stop, had not been turned on. That last part was the one that finished him. The Caldwell Police Department placed Officer Kowalski on administrative leave pending investigation 12 days after the incident on Mercer Avenue. Officer Salas received a formal reprimand and a mandatory course in departmental policy and constitutional rights. The Chief of Police issued a public statement expressing regret, though the words felt careful in the way that institutional words do when they're written by someone worried about lawsuits rather than someone actually reckoning with what happened. The lawsuit came anyway. It was settled out of court 14 months later. The terms were confidential, as these things tend to be. But Officer Harlan Kowalski did not return to the Caldwell Police Department. Colonel Harlan Osei-Beaumont went back to his life. Sunday mornings in his good suit. Church. The neighbor's casserole, delivered a week late with an apology and a pound cake. His grandchildren climbing on him at every gathering like nothing had changed, because for them it hadn't, and he was grateful for that. He didn't talk about the stop much. He carried it the way people who have survived harder things carry smaller ones, with a kind of quiet that doesn't mean absence, just containment. Lucille went back to the hospital. Her staff never knew what had happened. She didn't tell them. She kept doing what she had always done, running her floor with precision and warmth, making sure the people in her care were treated with the dignity that everyone deserves from the first moment, not after someone powerful shows up to demand it. And Rennell drove back to Augusta and went to work on Monday morning and did not consider, even once, that she had done anything exceptional. She had done what any child does for a parent, what any soldier does when there's a wrong that needs righting and the skills to address it are in her hands. Here is what that morning on Mercer Avenue laid bare, in case it wasn't clear. 2 people who had done nothing wrong were detained, humiliated, and treated as suspects because of the color of their skin and the price of their car. The combination offended someone's assumptions. That's the entire story. And the reason it resolved the way it did isn't because the system corrected itself. It's because a woman with a law degree and a military commission showed up and made it too costly not to correct. What happens to the people who don't have someone like that in their corner? That question doesn't have a tidy ending. That question is still open. It's been open for a long time. What Kowalski learned, what Salas learned, what that department learned, is that power has a way of arriving in shapes you didn't anticipate. That the elderly black couple in the Sunday clothes might have a daughter who has argued cases in federal court. That the person you decide to diminish might have spent 3 decades giving this country more than it ever gave back to them. That a badge does not make you untouchable. That a body camera exists for a reason. That assumptions have a cost, and sometimes that cost comes due on a Monday morning in the form of a formal complaint and a woman who knows exactly how to file it. But the deeper lesson, the one that doesn't require a lieutenant colonel to enforce, is simpler than any of that. It doesn't take power to treat someone with dignity. It doesn't require verification or backup or a chain of command. It just requires the decision, made before anyone's credentials are checked, that the people in front of you are people, that they deserve to be spoken to like human beings, that a 70-year-old man in his Sunday best has earned the right to drive his own car home without ending up in handcuffs on a sidewalk while his wife stands in her church hat and holds herself together by sheer force of will. That decision should come first, before the credentials, before the powerful daughter, before the lawsuit. It should have come first on Mercer Avenue. It didn't. And that is a failure that belongs to more than one officer on one Sunday morning. It belongs to every system that let it become possible, every complaint that was marked resolved without being resolved, every moment where someone in authority decided that accountability could wait. It waited too long. If this story stayed with you, if something in it felt familiar or infuriating or true, share it. Leave what you think below. The conversation doesn't end when the video does. Justice doesn't either.